Hey folks, thanks for watching my monologue. I'd like to encourage you to visit Guns Etc. They're strong supporters of our president and the principles our country was founded upon. Guns Etc. is 10,200 square feet and it's a firearm lover's paradise. And for all your online firearms needs, just click on gunsetc.com. And if you like my monologues, please subscribe to our channel. Thanks. Well, welcome back. Thursday, March 26, 2020. Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers, carried a quote in his pocket. It read, "Calm is a language the blind can read and the deaf can hear." I've always loved that. Admittedly, I've not always lived it, but I've always loved it. And in politics, you've known this has been an intent of mine for some time. I quoted Michael Oakeshott yesterday as writing, "It's to be the business of a government not to inflame passion and give it new objects to feed upon, but to inject into the activities of already too passionate men an ingredient of moderation, to restrain, to deflate, to pacify, and to reconcile. Not to stoke the fires of desire, but to damp them down, because the conjunction of dreaming and ruling generates tyranny." Just so, James Madison in The Federalist wrote of the problems of passion, one leading to mutual animosities, another leading to the diminished public good and rights of other citizens. Abraham Lincoln warned of unbridled passion in politics in his famous Lyceum address, saying it was the opposite of sober judgment. He even warned that where it may have helped us in the past, it'll be our enemy in the future. In his first inaugural, some 20-plus years after that Lyceum address, he warned it that it had broken our bonds of affection. Just a year prior to that, he warned, "Let us do nothing through passion and ill temper." If there was one major lesson from Lincoln to us, all of us, it was what he further said in his Lyceum address. Unimpassioned reason must furnish all the materials for our future support and defense. Just so. Some of this is why so many of us abjure vulgarity, extremism, conspiracy theories, and the constant agitation and frenzy the Democratic Party and the cable news industry and social media keep wanting to impose on us. If you want a pretty good example of all that we esteem when we speak of dispassionate responses, just watch how William Barr handles things. He's more devastating with his sober judgment and calm reason and brains, there's no substitute for brains, than all those who caterwaul against him. Let me not get caught up too much in personalities. My larger point is the one I keep making or trying to make. Don't lose your head even when all about you seem to be losing theirs. Which brings us to something else I often say. If something sounds too bad or awful to be true, it usually is. So now we come to the China virus. We rushed to panic. We rushed to worst-case scenarios. And all who urged a modicum of calm were upbraided and denounced for being irresponsible. Which takes us to the data. The projected data thrown around so irresponsibly for the past several weeks. The Imperial College study. If you're unfamiliar with that exact name, it's the study we in Great Britain were working off of in justifying all the measures that have been taken in our country, in our countries in the past 2 weeks. But despite the Stanford studies or the lessons from the Diamond Princess cruise, which so many of us were trying to explain, it was the worst-case scenarios from the Imperial study that dictated all we see around and about us now. But wait. Turns out the Imperial study was wrong, or its author was, as he now tells us. His name, Neil Ferguson. He's a British epidemiologist. Allow me to quote Paul Mirengoff. Ferguson warned that an uncontrolled spread of the virus could cause as many as 510,000 deaths in Britain and up to 2.2 million deaths in the U.S. According to the New York Times, quote, "It wasn't so much the numbers themselves that caused the policymakers to act as who reported them. Imperial College, London." That was the New York Times. Now, Ferguson and the Imperial College London have new numbers for Great Britain. According to their latest report, Dr. Ferguson says the number of deaths in Britain is unlikely to exceed 20,000 and could be much lower. And according to the New Scientist, more than half of those who die from the virus would likely have died by the end of the year in any case because they were either elderly or already sick. The average number of deaths from the flu in Britain each year, by the way, is 17,000. Ferguson now predicts that the epidemic in the UK will peak and subside within, quote, 2 to 3 weeks, close quote. Last week, he talked about 18 months of quarantine, while acknowledging the obvious, that a quarantine of that length wouldn't be sustainable. I assume Ferguson no longer thinks anything like an 18-month quarantine will be needed in Britain, if it will subside within 2 to 3 weeks. Science writer Alex Berenson, who's been on this show a few times regarding his book about marijuana, he cued into this, tweeting, Ferguson gives the lockdown credit, which is interesting. The UK only began its lockdown 2 days ago, and the theory is that the lockdowns take 2 weeks or more to work. Not surprisingly, this testimony has received no attention in the US. I found it only in UK papers. Team Apocalypse is not interested. To borrow from the Daily Wire, Ferguson's change of tune comes days after Oxford epidemiologist Sunetra Gupta criticized the professor's model. Quote, I am surprised that there have been such unqualified acceptances of the imperial model, Gupta wrote in Financial Times. Professor Gupta led a team of researchers at Oxford in a modeling study which suggests that the virus has been invisibly spreading for at least a month earlier than suspected, concluding that as many as half the people in the United Kingdom have already been infected by it. If her model is accurate, fewer than 1 in 1,000 who've been infected with the COVID-19 virus became sick enough to need hospitalization, leaving the vast majority with mild cases or totally free of symptoms. In other words, Ferguson's highly influential initial model was off by orders of magnitudes. This is not so different from the doctors at Stanford that I quoted yesterday, writing, quote, tens of thousands of people traveled from Wuhan to the U.S. in December. Existing evidence suggests that the virus is highly transmissible and that the number of infections double every 3 days. An epidemic seed on January 1st implies that by second week of March, about 6 million people in the U.S. would have been infected. If our surmise of 6 million cases is accurate, that's a mortality rate of 0.01%, assuming a 2-week lag between infection and death. This is 1/10 of the flu mortality rate of 0.1%. Such a low death rate would be cause for optimism, they concluded. But in an age of, well, a politics of extremism and hyper-caffeinated passion, you know, the kind of politics that says Donald Trump is an existential threat to the country, an existential threat to the Constitution, the worst president in the history of our nation, a Nazi, a Hitler, worse than Hitler, guilty of crimes that if left unimpeached would render impeachment hearings meaningless in the future. This is the coin of our conversation these days. This is the rhetorical coin of our political realm. An effort for each to outdo the last in ramping up the level of heat and language to energize and animate and inflame the passions of the populace. In other words, keep on inflaming passions. The one thing we are warned about, consistently from Madison to Lincoln, is about just the most unhealthy thing a republic could engage in. And thus here we are. 3.28 million workers applying for unemployment benefits. A tanking of the stock market. Businesses in massive and major distress. Hourly and middle-class wage workers thrown into doubt. And a federal bailout that is double the cost of our annual budget deficit and about half of last year's entire federal budget. The interesting thing to me about the left is they're the ones who urged the shutdowns. And they're now saying, whoa, there's your great economy now. There's bringing back America. There's American greatness. 3.28 million unemployed. They urged and caused the problem, and then they pointed the finger. To borrow from C.S. Lewis, in a sort of ghastly simplicity, they removed the organ and demanded the function. They castrated our horse and bid the geldings be fruitful. This is not the cost of lies. It's the cost of passion or hysteria. It's the cost of losing all perspective. It's the cost of not knowing what Nazism or Hitler is, or defining Nazism and Hitler down to the level of an American president whose policies are an admixture of Ronald Reagan and Calvin Coolidge. It's the cost of losing perspective. It's the cost of not teaching history or redefining or rewriting history. It's the cost of losing all calm and reason, which is the cost of losing our humanity. Why do I say it's the cost of losing our humanity? Remember, it was Aristotle who taught that the distinction between man and animal was that man, humans, had the ability to reason. That is, to use their rationality over and against, wait for it, passion. We're told, with all thy getting, get understanding. May I be so bold as to say today, that with all thy getting, let's try to reclaim our humanity and our reason. Be reasonable people. And if I may quote Charles Dudley Warner, let us limit this riot of passion and frenzy of vigorous life. I'm Seth Leibsohn. Be right back.